Good morning. This is Angela Gibson with Abraham's Consulting. Thank you for joining. And we'll proceed with our presentation, Accellion, where we lock down your sensitive content with powerful data encryption. Line or on the meeting, we have Mark McAuliffe, Diana Torek. Mark McAuliffe is one of our chief engineers and senior sales engineer, actually, with Accellion. If you don't know anything about Abraham's Consulting, please note that we were established in 2006. We serve the federal, state, and local government, as well as educational institutions. And as you can see from the slide, we vet technical staff for the government to put technical talent on sites in all different facets of technology. We also focus on niche solutions around storage, security, and networking. And we are the resellers of the vast majority of IT hardware, software, and peripherals, as well as IT consulting. In terms of the niche solutions, Accellion is one of our partners, and that's what we're presenting today from a security perspective. And we're also a certified AA firm with the federal government, and we also serve the state of Georgia and Maryland.
Hey, Angela, I think I'm actually going to be running the things from Accellion side. So thanks for the quick introduction. Really, the agenda today is to kind of first describe the issue that we have at hand, and that's particularly the third-party trust dilemma, and then talk about kind of how you combat these issues, so providing security and visibility around that sensitive data transmission. And then finally, we'll kind of touch on some different use cases and pain points that we've solved for different clients across different verticals in the recent years. So yeah, so as I mentioned, the primary issue that we're starting to see around the industry is this third-party trust dilemma. So the reality is that in 2021, all of us are communicating with hundreds, if not thousands of different customers, suppliers, partners, et cetera. And with those communications, of course, there's often extremely sensitive data being shared. So you can see here, we've got, IP, PII, PHI, and ultimately all of those, accumulate up to different regulations that every business around the world has to adhere to. So, HIPAA, GDPR, CMMC, these are all things that we're starting to see more and more frequently coming out with large fines for companies. So not only is it the sensitive data that we need to protect, but we also need to protect our organizations from those hefty penalties that come in the case of breaches around those. And kind of just like a few examples around this recently, a big one that was kind of widely spread was the Target hack back in, I think it was 2014. So what we're starting to see in that side of things is that organizations aren't getting attacked directly at their firewall or their perimeter. The way that these sophisticated cyber attackers are coming into organizations is attacking the weakest point in that supply chain. So in the case of Target, it was their HVAC company, a small local shop that didn't have the same resources to invest in their cybersecurity posture. So by getting in through that HVAC employer, they were actually able to log in and steal thousands of credit card information, ultimately kind of siphoning tons of funds out of Target and its customers. So there's that, the fines that come with that, as well as the breach of trust to your customers. Moving forward, when we're talking to organizations, this is kind of a standard outlook that a lot of these organizations have. So here in the middle circle, we've got your traditional systems of record and enterprise collaboration tools. So, a lot of companies are using Oracle or SAP for their financial databases. They might have Salesforce for their CRM, and then, often they've either standardized on Office 365 or G Suite for all the different communications that they're having. Then, naturally they put a firewall around all of those applications and set up rules where only internal employees can access those. And historically, that's done a really good job of protecting these internal applications. But the reality is that, nowadays what we're starting to see is this complete lack of visibility into all of the different transmissions of content. So here in that central ring, we've got dozens of different tools within all of these organizations to share data, whether that be through email, some type of collaboration, file sharing, web forms, automation around managed file transfers, secure FTP, and then mobile ultimately when these people are on the road. So what we're starting to see is that we've got dozens of different ways to access these internal databases through the firewall. And then we're, of course, ultimately working with those hundreds of different partners, suppliers, legal counsel, whoever it might be, sharing all of this sensitive information with them. So those lines have become blurred. And ultimately, what that means is that organizations don't really have a good understanding of where their sensitive content is coming and going today. Moreover, what we're starting to see is that with all of these different point solutions for sharing data, there's no standardization across the platforms for security. So, we update a policy in one, maybe we forget to do that in another one. And then that kind of flies under the radar and ultimately becomes more and more of a threat. So what Accellion hopes to do for clients is standardize this across all of these different channels. So all of the central ring mechanisms of sharing, mobile, collaboration, Teams chat, SFTP, automation, web forms, file sharing, email, Accellion is going to provide that mechanisms for your employees to share all of that data and then ultimately hook into all of those systems of records and collaboration tools that you've already invested in, ultimately providing complete visibility, security, and simplicity around the data that you guys are sharing. And with this, I think the real question is, when we're talking about visibility is how granular can we get? And what you're seeing in the top right corner is Accellion's CISO dashboard. And what this does is really tracks every piece of communication that is sent through the platform across those varying channels. So, I'm looking here in the top right and I can see all of the downloads, all of the views, and all of the send activities that have occurred over the system over any period of time. And ultimately, what we're also doing is we're standardizing the system log for all of these transactions. So the other big issue that we're starting to see with clients is that people have invested in SIM tools to provide analytics and potentially flag nefarious events. But with that, the data coming in from these various sources looks different in each case and may have different data points associated with it. So really making sure that that data is clean and giving your SIM a complete data set has become more and more challenging. So with Accellion, we're able to hook into all of these different systems and hopefully provide that standardized system log to ultimately provide better security and tracking for you. And then what we also do is you can click into any of these transactions and see exactly who's accessing the content, how they're accessing it, what IP address, and the metadata around that file. So ultimately, once we have that centralized, normalized data flow, we can inspect every single communication. So when this inspection occurs, we're going to have full knowledge of the identity and information flow. So who's sending the data, who's receiving the data, and how they're sending and receiving it. So this gives us complete visibility and control over those third-party communications. And of course, these system logs are going to be immutable. So ultimately, we can recreate any event that happened in the system in perpetuity if we need to for different legal reasons. And Accellion first and foremost is built around the security. So with that, we're going to offer state-of-the-art encryption. So every file that enters the system is going to be encrypted at rest and in transit. You can see here some of the encryption methods. So we offer AES 256 at rest. Each file is going to have its own unique key. When we're sending these over the internet, we can use TLS in transit up to 256 bits, and you can actually control the layers of TLS that are accepted across the system. And then more importantly is ultimately you own and rotate the encryption keys. So regardless of how the system is deployed, there's going to be complete privacy around the data within the system. What we're starting to see is that more and more the government is going to the different cloud providers and subpoenaing them for data. And if you don't own the encryption keys to your data, you're at risk of the government actually accessing that content without your knowledge. And that was based off of the Cloud Act that came out about 10 years ago. And then additionally, more for the government side of things, we do offer full FIPS 140-2 encryption as well. Really, the important thing that I like to point out about this slide is that, we're not trying to promote a forklift approach. We're trying to actually seamlessly fit into all of your existing investments. So we're not trying to sell data storage. We're not trying to sell you, a different version of single sign-on or multi-factor authentication. We realize most organizations have already made investments in these. So what we're going to do is hook into all of these different standardized tools using the standardized protocols. So you can see here, obviously we offer SAML 2.0 for single sign-on. We can hook into multi-factor authentication using the Radius protocol. If you've made an investment in data loss prevention, we can hook into that using the ICAP protocol. And then we've got native integrations with advanced threat protection, as well as HSMs for your keys. And then ultimately, we'll take the syslog from the system and send that to your SIM tool. Like I said, hopefully empowering that investment that you've made in the SIM by giving it clean, complete data that allows you to really perform more deep analytics around that data. The other thing that I mentioned earlier is that we really want to enforce strict policy and allow the administrator to control how these users are interacting with the system. So the idea is that if the administrator can control all of these different channels of communication via a single standardized platform, you no longer run into that issue where you've got these different point solutions that have different password requirements or single sign-on requirements, whatever it might be. Now, using Accellion, you have one single platform that applies across all of these different channels of communication. And what you can see here is just an example of what we offer on a user profile basis. So within the system, there's the concept of a role and then a profile. The role term determines what level of access that user has to the system, such as an administrator or a help desk person that can simply reset passwords. And then the profile determines how that user interacts with the system. So we can see here, looking at the left, if I want to configure the system where when I'm sending a file, only the recipients of that email get the file. Well, now I've got a complete chain of custody on that document. And then again, hopefully every decision that the administrator makes is done with security in mind. And then ultimately now your users are adhering to the different policies set forth by the security team without even necessarily knowing that. So now I'm going to kind of talk quickly about the New York City law deal that we worked on with Abrahams. So what you can see here is New York City Law is really kind of an interesting organization. They've got over 1,000 lawyers and ultimately is about a 3,000 person organization. And really their mandate is to work with all of the different cities, agencies, as well as residents of the city to ensure that the legal profession is kind of doing their job. So with that, they're interacting with a variety of different third parties. It could be anyone as sophisticated as, a large bank that has a headquarters within the city, or it could be, a local convenience store where someone slipped in front of their where someone slipped in front of their storefront. So with that, they're extremely at risk because they have highly sensitive data about all of the city's proceedings. And more importantly, they're really dealing with a lot of different third parties. And some of those third parties may not even have, anything more than a Gmail or Hotmail account. So with this sensitive information, they really needed a solution that was going to hopefully empower their workforce while providing the security that they need to get their jobs done. So these were a few pain points that we uncovered when we were working with the organization. And, I'm happy to say that we've rolled out the solution, and I think we've really addressed all of them, and the feedback's been largely positive. So it's been a good partnership so far. But, the pain point number one was providing a strong cybersecurity foundation. Everything that goes into Accellion's product has to go through our security team first and pass all of their different rigorous tests, as well as we go through a FedRAMP certification every year where they check all of the controls, and it's extremely granular in terms of what they're looking at. So we need to make sure that everything that we do is secure. The other thing that we're going to want to do is make it easy for them to use this secure communication. So when these lawyers are sending documents or receiving documents, we want to provide encryption around that. The best description I've heard is sending an email over your Gmail is essentially you're like writing a social security number on a postcard and mailing it to a friend. You really have no control over who has access to that when it's going over the open internet. So with the legal team sending sensitive data and working on these sensitive court cases, they needed powerful encryption around that, and we needed to make it easy for them to utilize that technology. So you can see here that ways that we made it easier for those lawyers to access that content was really hooking into the different systems that they're already using. So I won't really spill all the details, but we were able to hook into all of the major systems that they use and provide plugins into their Outlook and things of that nature so that those lawyers could really continue doing the job that they're doing today without much of a change, just knowing that anytime that they're sending or requesting information that has sensitive data in it, use Accellion for that. And like I said, it kind of sits exactly where they're already working. So it hasn't been a big change at all. And then ultimately, the name of the game within the legal space is ultimately providing a audit trail for the e-discovery process. So anytime that they're sharing these documents, non-repudiation is going to be top of mind. If they share this data, they need to be able to prove that that third-party counsel indeed received it. So with Accellion, we're going to track all of those and then ultimately require those users to log in to access that data. So now you've got a complete chain of custody on these documents once they've hit the system. So now if I share a document and I see that third party does indeed download it, I can go to court confidently knowing that this e-discovery piece of information is going to be valid within the court of law. And then lastly, giving them complete visibility. So it was interesting, we actually initially rolled out the system right at the start of the pandemic. And with that, that CISO dashboard that I referred to earlier was interesting to them because their CISO could actually see some of the lawyers were accessing documents from different states, which would obviously be out of the norm back before the pandemic, and even other countries. And it was easy for him, if he saw someone logging in from a different country, to kind of reach out to that lawyer and make sure, hey, is this where you're quarantining, things like that. So not only is it good information from from like a SIM perspective, but he was actually using it really just to make sure that the different people were actually valid in the system. Because anytime he saw something outside of that kind of tri-state area, it was basically an immediate red flag that maybe we want to make sure this lawyer is actually logging into the system and that their credentials aren't compromised. So specifically, around helping out government agencies, you can see here, that does constitute over 20% of the company's revenue. So with that, I think the reason we've done so well is that we're able to adhere to all of the different regulations, whether that be HIPAA, NIST. I'll touch on it in a second, but upcoming CMMC regulations, because we provide a FedRAMP authorized cloud solution. So we've been FedRAMP moderate now for the 6th year running, which tends to check a lot of box for those government entities. And ultimately, our FedRAMP offering actually provides all of the same functionality that you get from the standard platform. So nice plugins, we can provide SFTP services, full-blown automation around our managed file transfer tools. And then we can hook into, like I said, all of those different Office 365. We've got a REST API to seamlessly integrate with existing tools and platforms. And this is kind of, again, just to build out on these use cases, when we're working with these government entities, there's a huge myriad of different use cases. So, when we're working with law enforcement, they're taking sensitive body cam footage. Those videos tend to be really large. So, if they have an hour recording of an arrest and chase, that could be hundreds of gigabytes. The nice thing with Accellion is that it's going to be virtually limitless in the size of files that can be sent. So we can support anything up to 16 terabytes per file. So with that, like I said, New York City Law is working with their police department in collecting this video evidence. And historically, they were going through and burning DVDs, encrypting those, and either putting them in the mail or running them over and hoping that they made it, and someone had a DVD reader and all of that good information. With Accellion now, you can do that through a modern platform, without leaving your desk. Document requests from citizens, if they need passports, visas, that's highly sensitive information. It's got their social security number. We'll provide the encryption around that. We'll provide full mobile control. So if those users are traveling or those law enforcement agents need to take a picture on their phone and we want to send that securely back to the headquarters, we can help with that. Automation is for, if you guys are setting up different communications from agency to agency or from your agency to your parent agency, we can actually go in and schedule those and provide tracking around that as well. And then, system integrators and suppliers, they're using this for just sending sensitive logs. If you guys have, an issue with a existing investment of software, they probably want to request a log. Those logs are hundreds of megabytes, a few gigabytes, and probably have really sensitive network information. Sending those through Accellion, you'll get the tracking as well as the ability to send those large logs in one platform. So that's just a few of different things. Ultimately, it's just providing that complete privacy and enabling your workers to really do their job. We also work a lot with design and manufacturing teams. A lot of the same kind of use cases that we mentioned before. They've got extremely large file sizes. There's sensitive information. They've got their IP or they're releasing software and it's got their kind of, all their code in it. So Accellion can be a really good solution for that and allow them to kind of, again, seamlessly fit into their Outlook or Google Drive, wherever it is that they're working. I mentioned it earlier, but we do go through the FedRAMP authorization. So we do this every year with a company called Coalfire, and they're an auditor that comes through and, looks at all of the different processes we have in developing the platform, as well as looking at the platform itself for any potential issues or, CVEs. So they'll scan this and make sure that we're touching on all 325 controls that they have set forth. With Accellion's FedRAMP offering, it's a bit unique. You'll get actually a private cloud, meaning that there's no multi-tenancy. So it's just your data that lives on that AWS image. And then, like I said earlier, ultimately you'll own the encryption keys. So it's a really nice solution where, you can go to the cloud without sacrificing the security and privacy that you get from your on-premise solutions. And then these are just some of the different kind of common regulations and compliance that we're coming up against. And ultimately, the platform is very flexible. It's going to track all of the different communications for you. So we can usually align with whatever regulations it is that you fall under. And then CMMC has been a really popular one recently. If you're not familiar with CMMC, it's a new regulation set forth by the DoD. And the idea behind it is actually kind of the subject of this talk right now, is that the supply chain has become the biggest vector into these organizations. So what CMMC requires is that anyone working on confidential, unrestricted information for the Department of Defense, so that could be the prime contractors like the Boeings and Lockheeds of the world, but all of their subcontractors as well, need to adhere to this CMMC regulation. So it's really widespread effects across the industry. And it's taking NIST 800-171 and applying an additional 20 practices and 51 maturity processes that you can see there on the left. And then ultimately you can see that what Accellion is supporting is level 3 for CMMC, which means that you have really good cyber hygiene. Any level further than that means that you're actually working with the DoD to enhance, the cybersecurity posture. So it's modeled after NIST 800-171 and DFARS 252, 204, 7012. In Accellion, if this is something that's coming up for your organization, we do have a white paper that we can provide that actually goes through all of the different controls set forth by CMMC guidelines. and tells whether it's in practice with Accellion or if it's out of scope. And lastly, I know we've talked about a few different deployments, but the last thing I would point out is just that the system's extremely flexible, so we can deploy it entirely on-prem. We can host it on your behalf. You can host it in your own virtual private cloud. And then we do have that FedRAMP offering as well. And across any of these different deployment options, it's going to be really easy to stand up. I say if we're hosting it on your behalf, even in FedRAMP, it's going to be 24 hours tops. We can have that infrastructure stood up and get that into your hands. If it's being deployed on premise and we have the right people in place, again, it's a few hours and it can be stood up on Hyper-V or VMware. And again, of course, regardless of solution, it's going to be completely private. You'll own the encryption keys. And that was it. I guess if anyone has any questions, feel free to send those over in the chat.
Thank you so much for joining today. This is Angela speaking.